Daughter of the Sea by Shantae Harding. Read by Shantae Harding. Chapter 1. Once, a long time ago, there was a beautiful girl who looked like an angel. She fashioned her light auburn hair in a single neat braid down her back, and her large doe eyes were the blue that the sky would turn after a light storm. She could have married a very rich man, and many did ask for her hand. Though there were many young gents who came to call, she chose to stay on her family's farm so that she could help with the family matters, even though they weren't very pressing. The small farm lay on a cliff that looked out over the vast sea. The land was dominated by war, and the events reached their ears, but not the effects. They lived a very simple life, taking in children who were sent to their village to escape the war. It was always a tight budget and living situation. The rooms were doubled, but no one minded because there was no shortage of love to be given or hands to help. There were always whispers on the wind of the war being a lie, that elves were really evil creatures that ate the hearts of children. That was all rumor, and irritatingly biased according to Mother. Father always told her not to let the old men hear her eavesdropping on them, but to listen sharper to the talks of the people. It was her job to be the ears of the family, after all. All her elder brothers were gone and married, except for one who insisted that he needed to be around if ever the war spilled home, and who was to take over the family farm after his father died. Everyone knew the only reason he stayed around was because he was scared to go out into the big world all alone. Tommy was a bird they would never be able to get out of the nest. One day, as the girl was looking out her window at the swaying waves of the sea, she noticed that there was a large ship with black sails holding the insignia of a pirate. It was making way for a small village that lay in the valley below. She jumped to her feet and raced down the stairs. "Mother, Father, we need to warn them. There are pirates heading for the village," she called at the top of her voice as her parents looked at her in bewilderment. Her father shook himself out of his bewildered state, but her mother was the first to the small window facing the sea. When she looked back at the room, her face was white as freshly fallen snow. "Xandria, you and your mother get the young ones into the cellar. Also, fetch the eldest of your brothers and tell them that I need to see them now," her father barked. Mother started to cram blankets, bottles, and teddy bears into packs to bring down in the cellar, along with perishable food that wasn't already stored on the shelves of the bunker. Xandria ran to gather up the rest of her household, as they were scattered around in the numerous chores they were involved in. As Xandria rushed the young ones into the cellar, she heard her father talking to her brothers. "You don't let anyone into that cellar unless it is your mother or me. The same with who comes out, unless it is under my orders. Do you understand?" Her father ordered. After all of the brothers had promised, Father went to the barn. Mother followed after him swiftly when she reappeared a few moments later. On her face was written the concern she felt. Even the youngest of the children could understand how worried she was and sensed the danger that floated in the harbor. After they were all in the cellar, her brothers shut the door behind them with a clanging. There was a harsh and distinctive sound as some metal bars were put in place in hopes that they would help. Xandria settled the young ones into a corner and started to tell them stories of far-off places, as her mother lit candles to show the shelves of canned food that stood there. Xandria's father thundered into town. "Pirates! Pirates!" he yelled at the top of his voice. An elderly and fragile-looking man that Father knew as the village leader came forth from one of the houses. As Father slipped off Raven, a midnight black horse named for his wonderful grace and speed. "We know, Frederick. They have made contact. They say that they want your eldest daughter, Xandria. That is her name, is it not?" The town leader's voice came on the wind, barely audible to the ears of the younger man. After the elder had spoken, he sank back as though he feared that he was going to be struck. Though Xandria's father wanted to strike out, not at the man, but anyone who was in range, he held himself back, taking deep, calming breaths. "So, have you made up your mind?" Father asked, his voice rising to a dull rage. The town leader shook his head no as he shrunk back from the rage that coated the father's voice. "We decided to leave it up to you," said a short and portly council member, as he came out of the town leader's hut with his head held high. He was known to be very rude and whiny. The two men regarded each other steadily for a few moments. "Tell them that they will get their answer when they walk through the town up to our house. If they truly want my Xandria, then I hold them by the sacred law. They are not to harm a single thing in this village if they ever want a chance of getting my little girl." he demanded in a cool tone, talking slowly as if he were talking to a group of small children. Then he launched himself nimbly onto Raven's back and took off towards the house and the cellar where his boys were standing guard. The two men stood, looking bewildered after the retreating back of the young man that no one knew much about. The boys were all wondering what would happen. They were scared and a little relieved when they saw their father coming back at a top-notch speed. Then the boys felt their breath stall in their throats as their father vaulted off Raven's back, and they were able to take in the look on their father's face. The boys parted silently out of the way, but kept very alert, waiting for an attack. The heavy bars were out of place, and their father descended into the cellar. Opal and Xandria, please come with me up to the house. Xandria's father ordered as he turned and started for the house with Xandria and Mother close behind. The children stared at the retreating backs in horror. When they were all in the house, he shut the door with a snap. They are here for you. The damned pirates have come for you. Xandria, my darling, darling daughter, I will not let them take you against your will. But if you want to go, you may. Xandria's father said, while her mother burst out in tears that ran down her pale face, that was growing paler and paler by the second. Xandria was actually worrying that her mother may faint from the stress being placed on her. They will spare the others if they take me, Xandria asked. Her father nodded his head yes, his eyes screaming defiance at his own thought. Then I must go. No, Mother, don't cry. These are pirates. They have killed people for looking at them wrong, Xandria whispered as she hugged her mother and her father. Xandria didn't want to go. Her mother only wept harder. Then Xandria went to her room that she shared with 3 of the younger girls and gathered up a few of her things that she thought she might need, or that she just wanted to be able to have with her. She grabbed a few dresses, her small jewelry box, a compass, all of her books, and she placed a small golden locket around her frail neck. Xandria placed her things into 2 older bags that were already to fall apart, so they wouldn't be missed or needed. She pulled her braid up in a bun and stuck a small knife from her mother into her hair. She took a small pistol her father had given her as a gift from one of his long trips. She loaded it so that it was ready to fire and stuck it into one of the folds of her dress. Xandria walked down the stairs to see the rest of her family preparing their evening meal. She tried to help her loved ones, but she was simply shooed away. When the dinner was done, they all sat down to eat a meal that they thought would be the last that they would ever share. When the meal was over, Mother ushered the younger children into the cellar again. Xandria looked at her father, and then she entered the cellar. She looked at her siblings, hugging them all in turn. Then she told them a story that was hard to choke out, knowing it was the last she would ever tell them. The older boys came and sat at the top of the open cellar. Mother and Pa sat in a corner looking in at the happy and hopeful scene, listening intently to the voice of their eldest daughter. They wanted to freeze the picture and never let it change. Mother and Father were huddled together and whispering in hushed tones, but no one but Xandria seemed to notice. It made her smile that even in the midst of all the dark, one thing would never change. Father, they're here, one of the boys said as he looked over his shoulder. Xandria got to her feet, continuing her story. Xandria finished it with a happy ending and followed her father out of the cellar. Tommy, Xandria said to her elder brother as he looked over at her with a questioning look. No matter what happens to me, you don't move from your post of protecting the cellar and those kids. We're both older, and my life is probably half over. They're still young, and you better protect them for me and my memory. And then I want you to take care of this farm, you hear me? Watch after all the children, even after Father's gone, Xandria ordered. Tommy smiled and scooped her into a bear hug. When he smiled, his eyes danced and his face told a story of happier times. When Tommy let go of Xandria, she looked at the path to their house, and there was a group of pirates standing there, watching their every move. None of them was holding a revolver, pistol, or a cutlass. She turned to her mother. Don't worry, Mother. You and Father have taught me how to be strong. No harm may come to this farm while I am gone, and no harm may come to me. Xandria said the words as though they were a magic spell to keep them safe. Her mother's eyes filled with tears again. Xandria let her mother kiss her softly on the cheek. Then she turned to her father, and he put a firm index finger to her lips, then turned to the pirates and started to walk. Xandria followed carefully, watching the men they approached. "Are you sure that you're okay with this?" Father whispered as he walked. "Yes, I have to, Father. I will be okay." Xandria whispered back. Though she was saying this, she still shook with fear. They kept walking until they were about 7 feet from the group of pirates. "Here we are, but I must ask why you want my daughter," Father asked the pirates. One of them stepped forward. He had a scar that went across his eye that made him squint and seemed very intimidating to her small frame. "Our captain wants to have a pretty young lady on the ship to have as his pet and keep him company, to remind him of his sister, who we lost to a man who loved her many years ago." And the man said. Xandria then looked up then at her father in wonder. "She will go, so long as you promise by the sacred law that no harm will come to my dear daughter Xandria." Father snarled dangerously, looking from pirate to pirate. "We swear, and so does our captain. You do realize who you're dealing with, right?" the man asked, looking from Xandria to Pa and back. Xandria felt a surge of anger, as though they were not insulting only her, but her father's intelligence, and that would not do. "I know that I'm dealing with pirates," Xandria said, stepping in front of her father, shoulders squared, head held high, and jaw set in a hard line. Less the fragile woman she feigned, and more the woman that was unacceptable to the normal society that caused her father to fear for her safety among the village men. The same problem that made her of vital importance to her family as a young, insignificant girl that was never noticed when she stood idly minding children a little too close to this person or that. The pirates all looked shocked, more from the fact that she had seemed so fragile a second ago and was now standing ready as if she wanted to fight. "You're dealing with Zoltan," he said with a smile at the shock on her face. Xandria felt her father relax next to her, but she didn't turn to look at him. "The gentleman pirate," Xandria gasped. He nodded his head. "He is a gentleman who doesn't like to be kept waiting," one of the pirates said from behind the one who had been talking. "Father, I forgot my stuff in the cellar. I'm going to fetch them, okay?" Xandria asked, and then she turned to see her mother was standing there with the twin bags clutched in her hands. Xandria took the bags, dropped them, and then hugged her mother and turned to her father. She heard her mother's muffled footsteps walking back to the cellar and a stifled sob. "Father, I love you, and I know that I will be okay, and if any of them tries to hurt me, well, all I can say is good luck, because you and Mother raised me to be a fighter and never let my guard down for even a second. I leave as a sacrifice, and now because of me, no harm can ever come to this farm or the village that sits in that valley below us," Xandria said, making sure that everyone could hear her. Xandria hugged him, not wanting to let go. When her father let go, in what seemed too little time, she started to walk towards the pirates. When she was in their midst, none of them got near. They all kept at least 2 feet between them and her. She turned to look at the house that had been her home, her safe haven for so many years, and saw their kids sticking their heads out of the cellar. Tommy was hugging their mother, who was crying, and Father had not moved from where she had left him. "For now I say goodbye, but one day I will return," she called out. As she uttered the words, she felt that she was lying, but it made her feel better, and she knew that they would make the others feel better too. Xandria started to walk again, her movements more robotic this time. "Xandria!" little Amy cried out. Xandria held back the tears that now threatened. Amy had been a special case. When she had first come to the farm, she would not eat anything or talk to anyone. It had been heartbreaking to see the little girl wasting away. Xandria had spent countless hours just sitting with her. Occasionally she would talk or read to her, and other times she would tell stories. Eventually the little girl began to talk to her. Just her and no one else. Amy became her little girl once she was back to being a normal little girl. Xandria refused to look back now. because that would mean that she felt that she would never return, and she didn't want to admit that to herself or the others. "Xandria, no! Don't leave!" Amy's cries were like daggers in Xandria's heart. "Would you like me to hold your bags?" one of the pirates asked as he slowly extended his hands. "Don't you touch me or my bags!" Xandria hissed, pulling her bag closer to her side as she kept walking. Xandria kept her eyes straight ahead as she walked. The whole town was deserted. They walked all the way down to the docks where there was a rowboat waiting, bobbing on the water, beckoning Xandria to her prison. Xandria gingerly set her foot down in the boat. It was the first time she'd ever been out on the water when she wasn't swimming. The first boat she'd ever been in. The men rowed the boat, and she watched, helpless, as everything she had ever known sank away into the distance. She watched the receding shoreline, resisting the urge to jump into the water, jump into her liquid escape.